This morning we were struggling with some of the aspects of the Vijnanavad concepts, and in that process we also identify some of the keywords which would be repeatedly used today and after the days when we talking about Madhyamika as well. I do not say which I propose the words are the perfect translations. You can still research on it. Many other scholars might have some more appropriate words. But as a matter of fact, in accordance with the Vijnanavad or the Sutantikas, there's no direct relationship between the words and the meaning. They are all been conceptually input, so to speak. So we can make relations between the word and the meaning. All names of the individuals are later input and then it become identified. So therefore language is not very important, but a little bit of care should be taken for the language. If there is more better choice, then why not? The better choice should be taken, otherwise then we can go with it. Then I was informed that there are many original root tests of Vijnanavad are now being available in English translation. A list was given. Because I do not know, or these 20, 30 years before, when I was young and having a number of academic friends, like Bob Thomas, Jeffrey Hawking, Visse, or G. Garfield. They used to give me, whenever they translated something in English and the books published, they used to give me. Later on they come to know that I do not read them, then they stop to giving. Because I can't read the English books, thick books. So now nobody gives when they're translated. So any scholar who really interested into Vijnanavad, they should look into these translations, because these translations must have more appropriate terminology and words might have been used. Another thing I would like to mention here is a number of concepts, the Vibhashikas, the Sutrantikas, and the Vijnanavad, and sometimes up to the Sutrantic Madhyamika, they have common concepts. But in spite of common concepts, there are different ways of interpreting it. So sometimes it is difficult to differentiate the Vijnanavad's position and the Sutrantic or Vibhashika's position. If you read very carefully Paramanavartik or Abhidhamma Kosh, unless there is a specific reference in the commentary, we find it difficult to pinpoint whether they are speaking about the Sutrantika position or Vivashika position or Vijnanavad position. Of course, Abhidhamma Kosh does not carry any Vijnanavad position, and it is the Parmana treatises such as Parmana Vartik and Parmana Samuchaya. Both of these book, they have a lot of Vijnanavad position, Sutrantika position, particularly dealing with the mind and the subject relation, how to enter the mind on its subject. Mostly they are speaking from the Sutrantika position, but in a treatise of Vijnanavad. And similarly, they are speaking of the Vijnanavad position, which are very much similar with the Sutrantika position, or sometimes Vivashika position. So therefore, we cannot make a watertight compartment between these three philosophical schools. So we have to find it in a different way. Now, at this moment, we will talk briefly the Vijnanavad's position about the two truth, the relative truth and the absolute truth, because the definition of two truth comes in every school, but they very differ from each other. Although the word ultimate truth and relative truth, Tundam Demba and Kunzob Demba. The word Kunzob is not exactly a relativity. It is a kind of deluded or eluded a truth for the mind which is not seeing the absolute or not seeing the things in a perfect way. Kunzob Dimba is referring to such a thing. But when it comes to Vijnanavad, they do define these two truths a bit different than all the other three schools. In their view, a phenomenon on which your mind hangs on, or on which your mind is attached, it will increase the defaultments and it will increase the delusions. That kind of phenomenon, that kind of object is considered to be the relative truth, because it increases the delusion of the mind as much the mind puts on it. So thereby this is termed as relative truth. And the absolute truth is those things on which you dwell, your mind concentrating or meditating, then it leads to a higher realm of spirituality, and it enhances your journey in the path, and it decreases and also it eradicates the delusion, the defaultments, and that is the ultimate truth. Of course, when what is ultimate truth? They will say the selflessness of the phenomena, and the selflessness of the person. These two selflessness, these two damebe, mobu, so these are the ultimate truth. Then what is the relative truth? Then of course the entirety of the dependent nature and conceptually inputted nature. So we talk about the three characteristics of dependent phenomena, thoroughly established phenomena, and conceptually imputation phenomenon. So in these three categories or three characteristics, the entire existing things are included. Even non-existing things are also included. Just imaginary things are included. So among these three, only the thoroughly established phenomenon, the Yungdu, Parinishpana. Parinishpana is only ultimate truth. Other two, the Parikalpit and Pratantra, both of these characteristics belongs to relative truth. So this is commonly accepted by all sections of Vijnanabad. Actually, Vijnanabad has number of subsections. I will not able to go into these subsections, but we just referring to number of subsections. And this concept, two characteristics belonging to relative truth, and only the third one, thoroughly established phenomena, the Parinishpan, belongs to the ultimate truth. The definition of ultimate truth is that it is the object of the elevated person's insight, and also if you meditate upon it, you will lead the liberation. It will lead you to the liberation. So that's why it's called ultimate truth. And the others called relative truth, kunzobdemba, because you dwell on it, it will increase your illusion. So that is their way of defining it. Now, the Vijnanabads usually talking about the non-existence of, by its own nature, differently about these three characteristics. It is called Tsenyi Sum, that's why I call it characteristics instead of categories. Trilachana, all these are being termed as lachana, or the representation or characteristics. So the first one The first one, the conceptually imputation category or the characteristic. It has interpretation or connotation how this does not exist by its own nature. It says the imposition, the first imposition, it does not have its own characteristic. That means the conceptually imputation does not have its own self-existence because it is just an imputation, just designated by thought, so or by name or by thought. So therefore it does not have its own characteristic or its own nature. And the second one, the dependent phenomena, does not have its own nature of origination or nature of arising. Whatever word may be appropriate, you can use. The dependent things are all in the category of composed thing. Composed things shall have to be originated from a cause and a condition. Therefore, it does not have its own nature of arising. It arising always depends on something else. That means the cause and the condition. It is dependent on the cause and the condition. Therefore, it does not have an independent arising. So therefore, it is void of its own nature from the viewpoint of independent arising. Then the parinishpan, the thoroughly established phenomena, of course, it is ultimately does not have its own nature. And here the interpretation is a little different. It says this true selflessness is of an ultimate thing, and also it does not exist in any of the self. So therefore it is void of self and it is ultimate. Therefore it is called the ultimate void of its own nature. We do not call it is Tamba, it does not have ngoni, so therefore the combination of Tamba and the combination of ngoni, voice of ngoni, that makes Yundu Tamba ngoni meba. Why they interpret this way, elaborately talk about these three characteristics, does not have in a way its own nature, because this is the basis on which the Buddha have blanketly told in the second Dhammacakkaparvatam, that means in the Paramita Sutras. In the Paramita Sutra, Buddha negate all self-existing or by its own existing, of existing in truly existing, whatever it may be, they all be negated. And in a Vijnanvada's position, they have to establish that only The conceptually imputation does not have its own nature, but the other two things, the dependent phenomenon and the well-established phenomenon, Partantra and Parinishpan, these two categories does have its own nature, does exist by its own, does exist in reality and truly exist. So that contradicts the Pajaparamita Sutra. Now they're trying to interpret Pajaparamita Sutra, do say, do not exist anyone, anything from its own nature, but that should not be understood literally. They should be understood there are three no-existence of its own nature to be implied to the three characteristics. So therefore, Buddha said, on this consideration, he have said it, so it is understood on that way. So thereby, they interpret the first Dhammacakra Parvatan, which we talked before, the teaching to the 5 disciples is considered to be literally to be taken, and the last Dhammacakra Parvatan, particularly the Sandhi Nimochan Sutra, Dodi Gombang Nindil, these two are to be considered as Netarth, Ngedwin Chindo, and the Pajaparamita Sutra and all related sutras of Pajaparamita are to be considered as Tandun, as to be interpreted, as to be not taken literally. So this way they establish the entire position of Vijnanavad. So this is a basic foundation on which we can discuss the concepts of the Vijnanavadi, the Chittamatrata, slowly. So for today, I will stop here discussing the Vijnanavada position, because we have left number of questions yesterday, and then we have more questions today. So the rest of time we will dwell with the questions. Of course, the questions are very pertinent and important questions, but definitely I am not able to answer all of them. All examinations, the question people do have a choice. Out of 10 questions, you need to answer 5 questions or 7 questions. So I think you must have some choice. One question we have already read, and then it was left to respond, so that I will remind you again. The 7th one of the previous question paper, central to the Buddha's teaching are the notion of karma and rebirth, which, as I understand, are based on the existence of continuum of mind. Of course, very true. It's entirely based on the continuum of consciousness or continuum of mind. This is perfectly okay. In my discussions with my non-Buddhist friends, some of whom are scientists, the idea of mind that is more than a just physical property of matter which exists independent of body is unproven by any evidence, and it's therefore for them just a speculation. very true. It's for them just speculation. Then final question is, what solid logic or evidence does Buddhism offer to prove the existence of no material mind which can function as the basis of karma and rebirth? Very important, very basic question, but difficult to answer. So I will go categorically. The science people very honest and highly reputed science people say they do not know. They do not say there's no continuity of mind or there's no independent mind separate from matter. But the expression mind and matter is not coined by any religious tradition. Mind and matter, the expression mind and matter is coming from the secular knowledge, or perhaps scientific or social studies jargon, the mind and the matter. And there were discussions in various parts of the world, in the ancient and also, whether mind is more important or matter is more important. If there is a discussion about which is more important or which is the greater influential in our life, that means in the subconscious, a notion of difference between mind and matter is always there. The human mind, lot of things remain in the subconscious, and those notions are more near to the reality than well considered conclusions. Well considered conclusions might be some bias or some limitation, but unconsidered subconscious notions at many times near to a reality. So a notion in our mind and matter, when we talk about these two expressions, there's some kind of separation between them. Then what we can discuss and what we can say is that no existence of independent mind other than body is also unproven by evidence. So therefore this notion is also a speculation for the scientists and for the ordinary men also. They have no evidence that there is no continuity of mind, or there is no existence of a mind which is independent of the physical body. It is more discussed in Buddhist science whether a mind can remain completely without any physical support. So the Buddhist people at the level of Tantra might say so, a mind cannot remain or mind cannot move without a physical ground, without a physical support. So that's why we always talk about the interdependent nature of mind and the prana, so, I don't know, prana and so, what is exactly English? So, life force, mind and life, something like that. Life force, or in a Tibetan language, is called so, and this is in Sanskrit used as prana. Prana means a force which always in motion. It does not stay at one place. And to take it back to one place and make it unmoved is the effort the tantric practitioners do. And I think most of you know it. So that's different issue. Otherwise, leaving aside the concept of prana, the life force, then mind can be proved independent of body. It's not always a quality of body. David Bohm, a very famous physicist who used to have long dialogues with Jiddu Krishnamurti, and I used to have a lot of discussion with him, and he acknowledged that the scientific tradition until now do not have any knowledge about the continuum of mind. David Bohm also knows His Holiness very well, and they have a lot of discussions. And then there's another scholar, now I don't know whether he is still alive or not, I have no information, the author of Tao of Physics. He is also a physicist. I do have a long chat, rather heated arguments with him, so they also accept that they do not have any scientific evidence to prove that there's no previous life and there's no rebirth. They only say they do not know, they do not accept. But the mediocre scientists, they say there's no previous life or there's no rebirth and so on and so forth. So, strictly scientifically speaking, both ways there's no evidence. And it does not mean you are not finding something cannot be considered you have found it no existence. Not finding and finding no existence is entirely different. So we have to differentiate, and we have to say that you did not find evidence, you also did not find definitely it does not exist. So this is a statement of fact as of today. The scientific research goes on and improve themselves and knowing more and more things, then they might establish with evidence that there's no continuity of mind. And at that time, we will see what will happen. But until now, honestly speaking, we can't say no existence of continuum of life, previous birth or rebirth. It does not exist, is scientifically proved. they scientifically do not know. So that shall have to be clarified in our mind. And both ways, for the scientist is speculation. No existence, existence, both are speculation. Then the second question, what solid logical evidence does Buddhism offer to prove the existence of no material mind? I think during Buddha's lifetime, no one raised the question directly to Buddha whether a continuity of mind do exist or do not exist. That's why in Buddha's own words, we will not find any argument to prove the continuity of mind, the consciousness. And at that time, everyone is taking for granted, because at that time, all the spiritual traditions are of the believer of continuity of life, continuity of consciousness. Only one tradition, Charvak, that does not exist. It happened and it disappeared. There was no tradition of that. So therefore, no one have argued in this way. But later on, I think the question come up. Then the later acharyas have to argue with this question a great deal. The more specific arguments are given by Dharmakirti in his Parmanavartik, and also by Acharya Baba Vivek in this in his great treatise Tark Jwal Togim Barwa, Omanhibu and Togim Barwa. And these acharyas have dealt in this argument quite extensively. And I do not remember the details of the argument, and I do not remember the verbatim what they have argued, but I can sum up all these arguments into 4 categories. The first is about the cause of consciousness. And the second is about the perpetuate habits of the living beings. And the third is the experiential. Experiential means remembrance of the past lives. So these 3 are basic grounds of the various arguments. And the fourth is not accepted by everyone, because we have discussed yesterday, there were Buddhist schools do accept the ending of consciousness when they enter into no residual liberation. But majority of Buddhists accepts that there's no end of consciousness. And for them, the fourth is the potential of the consciousness to continue its continuum, its it's I don't know what's the June Santat, it will go continue. So we will briefly discuss the first three. The argument is that consciousness can arise without any cause, or it need a cause. This was the basic question. If you accept that consciousness, the mind can arise without any cause, then it should have arising anytime, every time, anywhere or everywhere. Why it arises at a particular condition? Only a complete body can have, or certain form of body can have consciousness, and the trees and the bricks and the pillars and all these things, why they do not have consciousness? So it cannot be arising without a cause. Then if need to arise from a cause, then it cannot arise out of a different nature of cause. A material cause cannot give birth to a non-material mind. If material cause can give a non-material mind, then there would be possibility of producing by effort. A consciousness can be produced by an effort. If there is a material cause, it's bound to know, and we can accumulate those causes and then have a big industry producing consciousness and accumulate the raw material, and then somebody knows how to engineer it. This morning or yesterday I referred about the 2040 Avatar project. So I was not accurate. It was a 2045 Avatar project. And that's also not transferring the consciousness in the robot, but it is effort to genetically modified consciousness, as we have today a lot of genetically modified seeds of various food grains, such as genetically modified reproduction of consciousness, something like that. You may look into the internet about it, but I was very roughly speaking the wrong figures. So thereby argue that a consciousness can be arising out of a similar cause. Therefore, a consciousness should be arising a foregoing consciousness. Pre-going consciousness can produce a second consciousness. So, therefore, the consciousness does not have any beginning. Then they argue the just newly born baby's mind has born out of a foregoing mind, because it has the quality of mind, a clarity and a capability of knowing the things. So therefore, it was come out of a similarity cause. So therefore, this mind is not born with the body in the womb of the mother, but this mind is come from some other source and it entered into this body. So this is analytical argument about the cause of the mind. So I'm overly simplifying it, otherwise it has so many arguments and counter-arguments, so we cannot go into that. In a very nutshell, what they are talking about is the mind cannot arise without cause. That need to be proved. And then, if need a cause, it cannot be cause of no mind. No mind cannot convert into a mind. So therefore mind needs a cause of mind, therefore it has no beginning, so therefore it will definitely have somewhere in the previous life. So this is one set of argument. Then second set of argument is all the living creatures who are born from parents, or who are born from eggs, or who are born just in a combination of something outside, whatever mode of arising, taking birth, the smallest baby of any living creature do have a very particular habit, and that particular habit cannot be considered abruptly arise. It shows that there have been certain repetitive practice of these things. That's why this habit comes to this new life as well. For example, newly born kittens or newly born cubs need not to teach how to find the mother's milk or mother's breast, although their eyes are not yet open and they do not know the direction. Still, instinctively, through the perpetuated habit of so many lives, instinctively they go to a mother's milk, or they feel confident and comfortable in the lives of one's own mother, or it's born out of an egg, and they know how to find food and how to roam about, so on and so forth. If mind is absolutely freshly arised in this body without any previous habit, then how these small newly born babies can have a sense of direction and sense of do's and don'ts, how to find security and how to find a food, so on and so forth. Instinctively, they do have fear, and instinctively, they do have intimacy with their mother. And all these are of a repetitive action which give impression to the mind, and it becomes habit, and that habit shows in this life as well. So that is the second set of argument. And the third set of argument is that there are many authentic people who very clearly remembers the past life and who knows the next life as well. They are not one or two or three. They are numerous at any time. I think someone has compiled in the contemporary this kind of remembrances, and I have not read, but I was told that more than 150 cases of in recent times have been recorded who very clearly remember the past life, and then they verified this remembrance and went to the place and recognized the people or recognized the articles and so on and so forth. And for that matter, the Tibetan tradition of searching reincarnation of lamas, there are also majority of the reincarnated lamas did remember when they were a small child and gradually forgot. Otherwise, they do remember the past life. A recent book published by one of the Khenpos from Sirta Chugar, maybe Khenpo Sutinyima, he also quoted 5-6 cases of his lifetime, how they are not the reincarnated lamas, they are ordinary people, but remember the past life. Sound-minded person, one normal person who remembers the past life, and his remembrance is verifiable from the material evidences, then how can we deny that? Deny of such thing cannot be considered as a scientific if these scientists are honest. Remembrance of yesterday is a solid evidence. The science people do not make every experiment in single day. They do years and weeks and months together, and they remember what they have done yesterday. And they will not deny, yesterday I have done. No, you have to put evidence. The remembrance of yesterday is not as solid evidence. You have to put some material evidence. I cannot rely on your remembrance. Then perhaps each day we shall have to ask the identifications of people. Oh, yesterday you were Mr. Dawa, but today I don't know. I do not have evidence. So this is not a scientific way of looking to the things. So the cause of consciousness and the cause of habits and the clear remembrance of the normal, ordinary people, these three are basic fields to argue there is a continuity of mind. Then in the Madhyamikas, they also say a mind will definitely reproduce its continuum in the next moment. And there's no mind which does not have the potential to reproduce its continuum in the next moment. So this is the fourth argument, which are partially accepted by the Buddhist schools, who do not accept the cessation of consciousness at the level of liberation or nirvana. Now, what is the way to analyze or experiment through a scientific method? If we really interested in proving this through a scientific analyzation, then we should think of some project of proving into it. Now people know, the science people know that how the universe was created, the Big Bang, how it had happened, they know. But they should know more how we did evolve from monkey to manhood. That also need a lot of scientific and material evidence. The monkeys has potential to evolving into a human being. Then what the today's monkeys have done wrong? They should also already evolved. I think they also consider two different ultimate yans. Some monkeys can evolve and some monkeys cannot evolve. So a lot of scientific findings need to be re-examination and real scientific proof. So we can think about how to examine. I think the argument of cause, argument of habit, these are difficult to put into experiment. But argument of remembrance can be put in a test, scientific experiment test. And everywhere, every time, the remembrance is happening. And wherever is happening, then there should be some well-organized project to put them into the experiments or tests of the scientific method, and that might lead us to a logical conclusion. Even we are not able to reach to a logical conclusion, the benefit of doubt is always there. Unless and until you have undeniable proof that there's no next life, it's better to take caution. Better to think that there might be a next life, so I shall have to be careful. So that is the safe side. So I think this much is for this question. And can you tell me the next question?
The next question is about contemplating on the four schools. You mentioned that the Indians were more honest and tried to adopt the view of the school that most corresponds to their understanding of the world. In order to use the information on the four schools as a tool to better challenge and understand our own misconceptions, would you advise us to try out the views of each of the schools and see if they work?
I think so. I may agree to this question. As I mentioned in the beginning, that Buddha never cared for consistency of his teaching. So therefore, the Buddha's words are full of inconsistency. And that inconsistency itself is taken as Buddha omniscient. Buddha knows everything. That's why his instructions or teachings are different, because the human individual's capacity, liking, disliking, and the past accumulation of karmic force, they are all different. Perhaps among the 7 billion people, there's not a single identical two person, even physically. Twin brothers or twin sisters, they are very much identical if we look from the distance. But when we took them a close look, approached them closely, there is a difference. That's why we call it individual. Vyaktik, the Sanskrit word Vyaktik refers to no one identical to it. Physically no one identical, then mentally also no one identical. That's why His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama always says, one religious tradition is not enough for the entirety of humanity. The diverse aptitude of humanity needs diverse religion and diverse teachings. That's why in Buddhism itself, so many different schools, sub-schools, and more sub-schools, there's almost endless. These are not arise without any purpose. All of these arise to benefit someone who is suitable to that. And in the Nalanda tradition, in Tibet tradition, we are being taught that we must know the concept of all the Buddhist schools, not only the Buddhist schools, non-Buddhist schools also a subject of study. One of the Indian acharyas have said that as much as I studied the non-Buddhist schools, that much my faith increased in you, that's Buddha. So knowing the other concepts will also help to strengthening your own confidence, your own faith, and your own faith, I don't know, it's popular. What I mean is the Shraddha, Deva. Deva and Shraddha is not exactly faith, but it is some kind of faith. So that's why in Tibetan centers of learning, they always look into the all four schools as much as possible. Although we don't have adequate information or adequate treatise about it, yet we try to find out. So yesterday we discussed that looking into the different schools are not for increasing your conceptual thought or more confusion or more thought process to be increased. It is for clarification. It's for adding more wisdom. And each one of the concepts do have a relevance directly or indirectly. That's why when Dipankar Shirjan, who visited Tibet in the 10th and 11th century, he wrote the treatises of Chanchulamchi Durma, Buddhpat Pradip, and later on the commentator says, this is a tool for understanding all different instructions or doctrines of Buddha to take one person's elevation in the spiritual field, one person's reaching to a liberation. It may apparently contradictory, and some of the teachings are not directly related to that particular, but it has some kind of relevance if you are able to look at it carefully. So if someone has studied the Buddhpat Padip, then it says you will be able to understand entire teaching have no contradiction, and you can also understand the entire canon as instruction for yourself. Sungra Malu Dangat Charwa. The Sungra Malu Dangat Charwa Tembathamchin Gamet Toba, to understand no contradiction among the different teachings and to understand the entire Buddhist canon as instruction to yourself. So that is only possible if you study and if you contemplate on it deeply. Hearing, contemplation, hearing means study or hearing, contemplation, and then meditation. So these three stages is the way of education in a Buddhist tradition. So there are many things you need to learn and you need to contemplate. And then out of learning and contemplation, then you will find which are the object of meditation for you. And you need not meditate on everything. So before that, you need to learn as vast as possible. That is helpful. Then of course there are some stage when people reach a practice of certain level, then learning and reading and hearing are discouraged in order to concentrate on one kind of practice. That is not at the beginning. That's quite at a high level. So I would say try out the views of each school and see if they work. So here try out is more meditative practice, then I may little bit alter this. Otherwise try out means, as I mentioned, to learn and to contemplate, then I would say yes. it will be helpful. After contemplation, then you will find how it is relevant and workable for yourself. So then thereafter you can practice it or you can leave. Then it is up to your wisdom. So I think that much is okay. What is the next?
The next question is about bringing this view into my Vajrayana practice. I follow the Vajrayana vehicle, and my main practice is the practice of Guru Yoga. Until now, I did not have much knowledge about these philosophical schools. How best can I use the information and framework you are providing to enrich my practice?
Very important question. I have to think over how to deal with it. Generally speaking, the practice of Guru Yoga is a very comprehensive yoga practice in which entire process of the path and the stages are included. Any Guru Yoga is not only visualization of Guru, and after visualizing the Guru, offering various part of the accumulation of merit or clarifying the misdeeds and so on and so forth. After doing the mostly seven links of puja, then it comes the final meditation. The final meditation in Guru Yoga shall have to be include the entirety of the path. If someone is a practitioner of Tantra, Vajrayana, then the Guru Yoga must include the practice of Utpatti Marg, Utpatti path, and Nishpan path, the Chirim and the Zorim, both comes within the yoga of Guru. And in that way, if you are not at the level of Chirim, Zorim, or kind of Dzogchen or Chakchen, then you are still in the path of Lerabling, in the path of renunciation, in the path of Buddhist, the Buddha mind arising, or in the path of practice of 6 professions, or in the path of analyzing the view, the darshana, the tawa, and at that level, the various teachings or various concepts of the different schools can be taken into the process of practice. But apart from that, you are at level of much higher realization and at the stage of Nishman path, the level of Zorin, and that also bit higher stage. Then at that level, then you may not need much information or much knowledge about the different schools, and you can leave them and concentrate on your own level of the practice. I mentioned from the beginning, and I'm also repeating here, that is always depend on what kind of practice a person is doing and at what level he or she is arrived. So according to that, they should have the skill of discriminating what is useful and what is not useful. If someone do not have a skill of that kind of discrimination, then they need the help of the guru, help of the teacher. So once one teacher can be approached and asked. So I cannot generalize it to this kind of practical questions. I think we can go to the next. I shall be brief because I saw there's number of questions. I'll try to be brief.
The Vaibhashika consider 3 seeds or types of liberation: Arahanthood, Pratyeka Buddhahood, and Buddhahood. If the Vaibhashika consider they all result in the cessation of consciousness, then what is the difference between them?
There is no difference between them when they are enter into the non-residual liberation. Hamenyande, when it enter into the Hamenyande, non-residual liberation, because all the 3 seizes the continuum of consciousness. But before that, they get liberation, but still in the stage of residual of the body, and the Arahantas are less capable of doing benefit for others, and the Patik Buddhas more better doing benefit to others, and the Buddha, the Supreme, doing the benefit for others. This is, there's no difference from the viewpoint of the Vibhashikas. The Arahantas and the Patik Buddhas eradicated only those defaultments which are belonging to the defaultment category. Not defaultment category, negative things they have not eradicated as the Buddha have eradicated. Buddha have eradicated both kind of defaultment kind and not defaultment kind. All kind of obstacles have been eradicated. The Arahantas and the Pratik Buddhas, the eradication is the same, but capacity to serve others are little more for the Patik Buddhas. And Buddha has the highest capacity because he has eradicated both kind of the obstacles. Therefore, he knows the entirety of the other sentient beings. Therefore, he can work in accordance with the suitability to the sentient beings. And when both of these three enter into a non-residual nirvana, then all three just disappear and there's no difference. Next.
The difference between arahats and the Buddha is that the arahats have not attained omniscience. What are the obstacles for the arahats to obtain omniscience?
If the question is strictly within the Vibhashikas or Sutantikas, then the Arahantas did not eradicated the non-development obstacles. Nyumonche maimbe dikpa. Nyumonche maimbe dikpa is explained in the these are not in the categories of the development, but it is something which obstructs to knowing things in detail. So Abhidhamma Kosh talk about something which is absolutely subtle. They are not able to know by Arahantas, which are so distant in time. That's also not able to, which are so distant in space, in a place, that also, which are so anomalous. There are four kind of thing they have counted. Dvichikalve meshiva, nechikalve meshiva, namdan thayebe meshiva, ngoshin trave meshiva. This kind of two unable to know, this kind of four unable to knowing, obstacle to knowing exist within the Arahants. It did not eradicate it. Something, its nature is so subtle, then Arahants not able to know it. Something is so enormous, Sutinji Pumbo, Trashin Tower. The subtlest or the enormous details of shield, the Arahants are not able to. Then similarly, something is happening. Many, what we call this Milky Ways. So many Milky Ways after somewhere in a place something happened, then Arahantas cannot. And something which happened so many years before, so many eons before, or so many eons after coming, or this kind of things Arahants are not able to know. So that's why only Buddha is considered to be omniscient. So these subtle things are not due to mental development, but is due to the capacity of mind to know the things. So that was the difference considered by the Vibhashikas. But it is not true in the Madhyamik sense. Yes, next.
The Vaibhashika realization of subtle selflessness is realizing the absence of the self outside the five aggregates. Then how do they realize that the five aggregates themselves are selfless, which is a necessity, since this is one of the four seals?
Of course, it is easier to understand the five aggregates are selfless, because when we analyze to the five aggregates, even ordinary individual can immediately see, I'm not my form, I'm not my feeling, the feeling is my feeling, and I'm not my action, I'm not my consciousness. My consciousness is something, I own this. So therefore, the immediate grasping of mind is a separate I which rules over the five aggregates, or which uses or which commands over the five aggregates, and particularly a kind of ownership of the five aggregates felt. So that I need to be negated, and that I negated, then there will be no grasping of I on each of the aggregates. Each of the aggregates is easy to prove that that is not the solid I. Yes, next.
We often speak about the Theravadan tradition in the context of Hinayana. To which of the two philosophical schools, the Vaibhashika or Sautrantika, does the Theravadan tradition belong?
That I don't know. We try to understand Theravadan tradition, and the Theravadan tradition do not have much of philosophical treatises, and what we commonly read is the two famous Abhidhammic book. The one is the Abhidhamati Sango. Abhidhamati Sango is considered to be a Theravadan Abhidhamma, and which is translated into Tibet language as well in one thick book. And in that there is not much deliberation on the selflessness or on selflessness of person or phenomenon. It is only counting of the Abhidhammic categories. And the other is Vishuddha Marg, that is from Pali Canon, and written by a great scholar, and is considered to be the essence of the entire Pali Tripitaka is put there. And that also deals with mostly the 37 Buddhi Paksh, Marg, and something like that. More categories and more practitioner things. Shamat and Vipassana and 37 Buddhipachas are being discussed in great detail. But from there also we are not able to figure out whether Theravada should belong into Vibhashik or Sutantik. There are two possibilities. The Theravadan Abhidhamma written in the Pali language before the Vishuddha Marg is later on, before the Vishuddha Marg and tradition written, at that time there might not be very clear distinction between these two schools, or there might be, because Theravadan is one of the four basic Nikayas, so therefore in the subdivisions of the Nikayas, they might belong into different schools, and the main Nikaya may not be identified any other schools. But I don't know. The direct answer is we are not able to understand Theravadan should be considered as Vibhashika or Sutantric. Maybe in future some deep research may able to find it out. There are few scholars who have already worked on this, and they says it is undecisive. Yes, next.
If in the Vaibhashika context Buddhahood is the cessation of consciousness, then to whom would the Vaibhashika pray?
I think I was not able to explain properly. Buddhahood is not the cessation of consciousness. When Buddha enters into a non-residual liberation, that means Buddha enter into Mahaparinirvana. Buddha give up his body. The historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived for 80 years, and then after that, finally, on the Vesak Purnima, he leave his body and he enter into Mahaparinirvana. When he enter into Mahaparinirvana, his consciousness is ceased. Until he was with the body, his consciousness continues, and people pray to that. But apart from that, the Vibhashika's recognition of three refugees are different of the other schools. I was not able to deal with it. The Vibhashika says the embodiment of Buddha or the person of Buddha is not refugee as taking refuge in Buddha. Taking refuge in Buddha is the quality which makes the person Buddha. The jnana, we call it in Tibetan language, se michishivi yishi, that means the knowledge, who knows the cessation of all obstacles, and who knows the wisdom, all these obstacles will not reoccur. It is ceased, it will not reoccur. So knowing this fact is a wisdom, semijishibi ishi, and that wisdom is the refugee of Buddha, sanje gindun chebechu, which makes the person Buddha, which makes the person Sangha. And the five bhikkhu coming together does not make a Sangha. The shield, the samadhi, and the pragyan, the threefold education which make the person as a bhikkhu, that is the Sangha. And the Dharma is, of course, the Agam and the Adhigam, Lungki Chu, Tobe Chu. So, Sangje Gindun Chebe Chu, that means which quality make the person Buddha, which quality the person make a fully ordained bhikkhu, that quality is the refugee Buddha, and that quality is the refugee Sangha. So therefore, even Buddha entering into the historical Buddha entering into Mahaparinirvana, and his continuum of consciousness ceased, yet the general quality which can make a person Buddha is there. It is a general thing. That quality will be attained by the fifth Buddha, such as the Maitrinath. When Maitrinath becomes Buddhahood, he will attain those qualities. And those qualities are a quality which generally can be defined. So that is the Buddha. And the Vibhashika's prayer to that. Sorry, I was not able to very short. Anyhow, next.
This is the last question here.
Oh, good.
It's about the development of the mind-only, or Chittamatra school. In the teachings this morning, it was said that the mind-only school is studied first because it is less subtle than the Madhyamika. I understand that Asanga gave more instructions on the practice aspect, but I do not understand how Asanga, who was born much later than Nagarjuna, can give a lower explanation of reality. My question is based on my concept that with time, the teachings and the mind which understands them are more subtle and closer to the truth.
I could not properly comprehend what is the question. Asanga is later, Nagarjuna was earlier, then what?
I think the questioner is expecting the teaching to have evolved and become more subtle in time.
Or since he comes later,
That's right.
then things should be more subtle. I think that is not the case. Our mind is conditioned that we always look the process of development as explained by historians or the scientists. They always think that the things are developed with the time in space. I repeated it a number of times that the concepts are not later development. I briefly mentioned that the Western scholars' jargon, the early Buddhism and the later Buddhism, is not a very appropriate explanation for the development of Buddhism. Because traditionally we believe that all the four schools, the entirety tenets of the four schools are of Buddha's original teaching. Each one of them has a reference back to the Buddha's teaching. In that matter, one may say that Madhyamika school was based on the second Dhammacakka Parivartana, the Parjamparamita Sutras, which was taught earlier than the Sandhi Nimunchen and Lankavatar Sutras, which are belonging to the third turning of wheel. In Buddha's period also, the Buddha's teachings were not timely developed. It is depend on what kind of listeners and what kind of disciples are being gathered or being in front of Buddha or being asking the questions. So therefore, the first Dhammacakka Parivartana, second and third should not be considered as a gradual development of his teaching. It is entirely self-contained teaching given in different times to different Vinaya Gyan, that means different listeners or different disciples. The need of the disciples, the capacity of the disciples, and the intention of disciples. In accordance with that, Buddha gives the first teaching, second teaching, third teaching, and this is not a timely development. All of this known by Buddha right from the beginning, and then teachings we are putting into a terminology is also something belonging to the conditioning of mind through a historical perspective. Otherwise, these three put in emotion of Dharma wheel, there are many scholars talk about there's not 10 difference. Even one time, there are two different teachings can be happen. So these are in the realm of very highly elevated spiritual field that we are not talking. We are talking in the ordinary sense. But in the ordinary sense, there is a time schedule. In spite of that, Buddha have given some information or some teaching in the first teaching, and then he acquired more knowledge, and he considered something differently, and then he gave in the second time, and thereafter third time it was more and more developed and subtle. That is not the case. So therefore, a Sangha might be appeared later on. Nagarjuna appeared before, but these two scholars were dealing entirely on different realm, on different stage, on different basis. As we discussed morning, that Nagarjuna was absolutely concentrating on the Parjamparamita Sutras and the Parjamparamita related sutras, and he have not referring or he have not taken up those other sutras, particularly Sandhi Nimochen and Lanka Avatar, on which the Asanga has built up entire his contribution to the Chittamatra or the Vigyanbadi school. So they are different sources, and they are different listeners or different realm. So therefore, it is not necessary that when Asanga appear in this world, the tenets of the philosophical school should become more subtle and more advanced. That was not the case. No more? 5 minutes left, and I think we can take it as a bonus, and we stop here. So perhaps we can compensate 5 minutes more tomorrow. So I shall stop here. Because today is a very good day, and you should enjoy it outside. Thank you.